welcome back and welcome to this session looking at sort of returning to the office and workplace, and maybe that's a blended model for the future. Just a bit of housekeeping. We've got captions available on this session today. We've got My Clear Text with us who are providing those. So if you go to the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen, easier said than done, then you can access those if they'd be useful to you. So as a brief introduction for those who weren't in the previous session, I'm Lucy Ruck. I'm the Task Force Manager at Business Disability Forum. I'm a white female with green eyes, and today I'm wearing a blue top. I come to you today from Cheshire in the north of England, and I've got a door behind me which could make it slightly interesting, although I have locked it because we're now during the hours of the day where the children come home. So apologies in advance. It's not quite a cat walking across the screen, but you know, it's my alternative. What none of you can also see is that I'm also a right leg below knee amputee. So I have 27 years of lived experience of disability. So in the last session, we had a look at the big changes for business as they had to adjust to moving out of their office space and move to that more flexible approach of working from home, sometimes overnight. We're now looking forward within this session about what the impact might be for our disabled colleagues as we think about returning to the office or the workplace. And that's an interesting one. I wrote these questions back in September, but of course the world has now evolved and changed back again since then. But at some point, workplaces. And we want to talk about what this might look like and what we might need to consider and what's going to be different from that life that was pre-COVID. But before we move on to the panel, I'm delighted to introduce Sean Gilroy, who will be sharing with you the work that BBC Cape have been doing. Over to you, Sean, and if you could introduce yourself and give us a quick audio description as well, and then into your presentation, that would be fab. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, and thanks to TechShare Pro for inviting us to talk about BBC Cape. I'm looking forward to the panel session coming up. My name is Sean Gilroy. I'm certainly mid to late 40s. Short, greying, more grey than anything else, hair, and wearing my kind of trademark black top because I've just got a lot of them. It's easier to use, just to pick up the same thing every day. And I'm coming to you from my front room with a very typical Zoom bookshelf background. I'm a little bit more about BBC Cape, stands for Creating a Positive Environment. And it's the BBC's neurodiversity programme where we're looking to promote understanding, provide some more training and look for positive action for change. So BBC Cape, it's run by myself and my colleague, Lena Hawke. We both work in the BBC's user experience and design department. I'm a principal there. Lena is a senior user experience designer. And we are, between us, the BBC's neurodiversity leads. We've been working on Cape for about 4 or 5 years now, and just as a bit of a cap, if you're new to neurodiversity or if it's something you've heard of but not quite sure about, it's a term that was coined in the late 90s by the sociologist Judy Singer, and it recognised the infinite range of differences in kind of cognitive traits, brain function. And it's a way of rethinking conditions like autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, not limited to those conditions. There's many under that banner of neurodiversity. But it aims to kind of rethink a traditional historic idea or stigma of these conditions and recognise that there are, across any spectrum, there are two sides to that coin. So it's recognising also the positive sides of that, the abilities and talents that can come with kind of different thinking and different behavioural traits. I've got this slide here in typical BBC fashion. I'd like to say that there are other resources available. There are many organisations now pursuing kind of neurodiversity programmes or initiatives, thinking about how they can accommodate and support their employees. We've seen probably in the last 12 to 24 months a huge increase in the number of resources out there and information available. If you are new to this or if you're on a journey at any point. yeah, there's an awful lot more to learn and pick up from. So why are we doing this? Current estimates suggest that are neurodivergent, neurodiverse, or part of a neuro-minority community. But very few employers, currently around 1 in 10, consider neurodiversity in their organizations as part of any policy or kind of HR strategy. So there's a lot of people out there that are potentially missing out on support because employers, organizations aren't necessarily thinking about how to accommodate and support neurodivergent employees. So there's a big challenge and a lot to do. And why are we thinking about neurodiversity? So kind of organizations, innovation has become increasingly important to organizations in an ever increasing global competitive market. I thought within organizations helps to offset that kind of groupthink mentality, everybody looking in the same direction. To have people who are thinking differently and approaching problems in different ways is of huge value and benefit to organizations. And it really diversity and inclusion, to have difference within your organization is of value to any place. And research has shown that from neurodiversity programs, accommodations that were delivered through those programs actually benefit everybody. So it's just a way of rethinking culture, of rethinking, how you design your space, your processes and policies. And everybody can benefit from this if you think about it from this kind of cognitive perspective. So what have we been doing through BBC Cape? When we started this about 4 or 5 years ago, we ran a survey internally and externally. We opened it up, and we found that stigma was by far the biggest of opening, disclosing, sharing a condition with an employer or with colleagues for fear of what the repercussions were for your career, what that meant for any progression within the organization. So people weren't real kind of disclosing conditions, so they weren't able to get the support necessarily and changes or accommodations that they required to be them complete selves and to manage, kind of reach their ability, basically. So we're having a look at this to think about how we change the culture within the organization to recognize and talk about and be open, normalize these conditions, and recognize the benefits from a cognitively diverse workforce. We're also thinking, obviously, we're from the UX team. So we're thinking about, how do we properly think about the processes and procedures that the organization puts in place? It's the same with any design process. If you're thinking of it's about understanding and building those things into your process from the very beginning. So we're thinking about, when people join the organization, this is not just about bringing people in and giving them a job. This is about understanding how we find talent, look for talent, and then how we bring people through and offer them a career. So what does the training and development for people look like? Is that available, and can we support people through that entire career process? We also want to, it's historically, we've always said this is about recognizing hidden talent. Increasingly, we think, though, this is just recognizing talent. I've got hidden in there and we've scrubbed it out, just to make the point that we don't, as we've gone through this program, we don't think their talent is hidden. We just don't think that organizations are looking properly or assessing people properly. So we talk a lot about skills gaps within different industry sectors, and we think there's an ability to fill, or at least address, reassess how we look at talent and ability. There's a big market of people out there. As I say, 1 in 7 people are ND. So if we just think about these processes, we could potentially help fill some of these skills gaps and just recognize the available talent. And kind of pointing into where probably the conversation with the panel will be looking at. This is about creating the right environment. What does that flexibility and environment look like? And we're talking about the physical environment particularly. So we devised an environment toolkit a while ago that we were able to use with our own estate team, along with some of the other projects, products that we developed through CAPE. and we were able to work with a project team that were constructing, building and designing a new HQ office in Wales. This is BBC Broadcast Centre in Cardiff. We were able to talk to the designers involved with kind of the internal build of this new premise, and doing their own research, learning from kind of the things that we'd done through CAPE. They were able to think about kind of inside that building. So not just physical accessibility, but cognitive accessibility has been thought about and designed into the internal of this building. The estate team have since been able to make some changes through maintenance schemes to the rest of the estate. But we believe that this building is kind of, you know, that first step towards thinking about cognitive accessibility with respect to kind of lighting, sound and noise within the building, wayfinding and navigation, color schemes and patterns. So we're very proud of this as kind of, you know, what can be achieved if people kind of work together and collaborate. And kind of finally, you know, this side of things again, it's a quote, you know, that's attributed to Einstein, you know, and it means a lot to us in kind of what we do and how we're thinking about things. You know, we have this standardized idea of what talent or ability looks like, and we assess, you know, redraw where that line is, what that benchmark is, because there's a whole host of people who are struggling to fit in with what we determine ability is. And, you know, that just isn't a standard that's applicable anymore. So we need to redraw that line, not just for neurodiversity, for everything, basically. You know, and we need to recognize the ability that people have. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much for that, Sean. That's really useful. And I think it's really useful to frame this conversation in a slightly different way sometimes as well. So thank you for that. Before we move on to the panel, a brief introduction with a kind of an audio description of yourself as well would be fabulous. I'm going to go around the virtual room. We've already heard from Sean. Bella, can I come to you first, please?
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, I'm Bela Gor. I'm the head of legal forum. I wasn't expecting the audio description, but here goes. I'm a small Indian lawyer. I have long black, increasingly greying hair, and I'm wearing a red
Please.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Beth Hartley. I'm a commercial strategy manager at Sainsburys, and I have a hearing loss, which I've had since birth. I'm also chair of the which is the first disability network that we've had in our 150-year history. So it's a really exciting time for us. In terms of what I look like, I'm very tall, unfortunately tall, about 6 foot, although you can't probably tell that from my screen. My favourite pink jumper, which is a roll neck, because I'm always cold, but they do say cold hands, warm hearts. So.
Lovely, thank you ever so much for that. Beth, David, can I come to you for an intro, please?
Sure. I'm David. I've worked in the area of disability and access since 1985, when I started out as a teacher of children with disabilities. Since then, I've travelled around the world working in different countries, and I now work as a consultant, particularly working in low and medium income countries. About a third of my work is pro bono. And I have a particular interest, as we talk today, about the needs of small businesses as opposed to large corporates. In terms of what I look, I will share in Geneva. When I walked in and asked a beer, as she turned away, she said, "That's wonderful. We don't get to serve Father Christmas in here very often."
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, David. Okay, I've got some questions, but I'd also really like to get your involvement as well from our audience. So please do post these in the chat or on Slido. And if you don't have the code, it's hashtag TSP20, so TechShare Pro, TSP20. I'm going to come back to you, Sean, following on from your fantastic intro talking to us about CAPE. And I was really interested to hear about the work you're doing around neurodiversity. And can you tell me a bit more about what you're putting in place and how you're planning on supporting your neurodiverse colleagues as people start to return to the office? Because that's going to be different potentially, isn't it?
It is going to be different, definitely. Interesting that came online very shortly before everybody was sent home, which is really disappointing. So we'd set this lovely environment up for people, and then they weren't able to use it necessarily. So yeah, it is about this journey, but the physical workplace, and we've started to think about accommodations there, and how we can support people, how we can train line managers and team leaders. You know, it's predominantly about listening to what people need, basically. And then, you know, we've had this kind of move to this forced kind of, it's very binary, either in the office and now everybody's at home, or largely at home. We still have broadcast critical staff in the offices. But it's, you know, a lot of the benefits from working from home in terms of a flexible arrangement seem to have been compromised because it's an enforced kind of position. So we've had to learn a lot. I think there's been, you know, an awful lot of conversation around mental health in the home environments, you know, in order to give people that space to kind of adjust to that sudden change. And it is a lot about talking. It is a lot about, you know, kind of being open, keeping in contact with people. And we've started those conversations now. And it's focusing more on again, providing that training to team leaders and managers so that they are prepared to have the conversations so that we can be a little bit more kind of ahead of ourselves when it comes to the return to the office. So let's talk about what people need. Let's give them a little bit of time to help them understand and get ready and prepare themselves for that transition back into the work environment. Other opportunities for us to share what that new environment looks like. You know, not just as an explanation, but kind of images as well, and just allow people to try and get a feel for where they're going for, and ask any questions that they can. So we're having those conversations for managers to be able to start having those conversations with teams, so that it isn't this kind of sudden transition that we had the other way, basically.
Yeah, and I think those images of what the workplace might look like can be really useful for everybody. So don't just focus on, everyone's going to have a clearer idea of how that might work. And of course, with alt text for those who can't see the images or descriptions and so on. Exactly.
It's about providing, you know, we understand that there are different communication methods and different preferences for people and different needs for people. So it's about thinking about both of those things so that we can offer as kind of many options as possible.
Thanks for that, Sean. I'll move on to a slightly different question now, and I'm probably going to focus this one towards Bella, who is our legal expert. But we know there's been so many organisations over the years who've been resistant to home working for quite a long time. And this pandemic has absolutely proved not only is it possible for people to work from home, but quite often people can be also quite productive working from home. What grounds will organisations have to refuse this option to work from home in the future, seeing as we've already proved it's entirely possible?
I think it is going to be difficult for people want to or need to work from home as a reasonable adjustment. And where that's been said, it's not reasonable before because the systems weren't possible. That I think is going to be harder to justify. I think you're going to say, well, you did it for 9 months during 2020. So saying no now is difficult. But I think actually, if I turn that on its head, not all disabled people want to work from home. There's been quite a lot of people who've, much as the rest of the population, have hated it because of their home life. You know, maybe it's cramped, it's busy, it's quiet, it's not quiet enough, they've got children, or sharing internet, you know, with other people. So I think if I could turn that on its head, yes, employees no, you can't work from home anymore. But I also think that employers will find it hard to say you have to work from home and we think you'll prefer it because you are disabled. I think quite a lot of people with disabilities, like other people, are going to say, well, actually, to the office or the workplace, and it's not just the office. So throw that back around as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bella. Did anyone else want to come in on that? Anyone have any other thoughts?
I think, yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with you that it's proven that people are more productive. What we're seeing is people working far longer hours, in order to achieve things. We're certainly seeing over time huge increases in problems of mental health, which are decreasing productivity. And that includes people with disabilities. And just to reflect what Bella said, I think we sometimes make some generalizations and work from home. To some people, the whole reason for going to work is to get out of the home into a more inclusive environment and to link up and connect to people. The important thing is, I know we're going to move on.
On that productivity point, though, David, I would say that what the research has found is that people who want to work from home and like working from home, and that's me, I've worked from home since 2008, are more productive. People who don't like working from home and they've been forced to in the last 9 months, they perhaps are less productive. And it is an element of choice. And I think there was a study in China with a travel agency a long time before this pandemic that did that, where they split the workforce in half and had them working from home and had them working in the office, and they could really measure it because it was a sales job. And when they said at the end of it, do you want to carry on working from home? And a good proportion said, no, I want to go back to the office, and they were more productive there. And a proportion said, no, I want to stay at home. It's a choice.
There are a number of complex factors, including what physical space you've got at home to work from home.
Yeah, I think we could go into that privilege conversation from there as well, couldn't we, in terms of work and so on. So yeah, it's an interesting one. We've had a question in and it does tie into this, so I will go to it now. Do you feel there's generally a bias towards what's seen as good or best in terms of having employees working from home versus returning to the office? So in terms of how employees are perceived, who perhaps want to continue working from home. So that's an interesting one. It's around the perception of employees who want to continue working from home. Bella, I can see you're smiling about that one.
I think there's traditionally been a perception, I speak here as a home worker, as I know, Lucy, you've been for a long time, is that, you know, we're all watching Jeremy Kyle and sort of slacking and you know, whatever it is that at home, apologies to the BBC, on there, but and you know, it's sort of like, no, we have been working, and I think hopefully this will end now that people have been shown to be actually delivering and producing work while they've been perhaps haven't, but they're the ones who probably don't like working from home or had a home life that made it difficult to be productive. So let's hope that perception will go now.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Beth, come on in. Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've been thinking about at Sainsburys has been moving that focus from kind of presence or actually being at the desk or being seen and the bums on seats mentality to output and performance. And so really I work from the starting point as a manager of going, well, are you delivering what we need to your goals? And ultimately, I think wherever you're based, if you're doing that, it makes it much easier for both sides to work out what good looks like.
Work is what you do, not.
And I think this, you know, this is about how we train, I think, you know, managers and team leaders of people. I think it's about, you know, their confidence to be able to be flexible with staff, you know, in order for them to meet, you know, their potential. We've always said, you know, we need to rethink what this idea of flexibility is. We understand that there is some time for the office and some time for the home, and people are better at different times of the day. So this is thinking about how do we train managers in those soft skills to be able to work out what's best for their team, because wherever people are productive, there's got to be some kind of flexibility in that. You know, and it's not this binary choice of either the office, either the home. We know that problematic. It's finding that balance between the two, I think, is where we need to be looking.
I agree, Sean. And I know for me, having been a home worker for 6.5 years now, if I go into the office, which obviously hasn't been very much this year at all, it's not worth me getting my laptop out because I can't concentrate. And I spoke to a colleague who also lives in Spain and then comes into the office, and he was saying, I just don't even bother now. I just do it to have the meetings I need to have, and I catch up with colleagues in between, and that's the way I deal with it. I don't feel guilty about not sitting there, and I'll catch up on emails tomorrow. It's absolutely fine. So I think that's quite interesting. And I can see that Wayne has put in the questions as well. It's more of a comment actually, that there's pros and cons with both in terms of working from home, and actually having that mix is really nice. And that kind of brings me on to my next question I was going to ask you, really. So it's probably pretty unlikely that on a set day, all workers are just going to return to the office and that's it. That's pretty unlikely. So we're probably thinking maybe and a bit of in the office or your workplace, wherever that might be, is far more likely. But what's the impact going to be of people that require adjustments or duplicate kit to be available for them in both locations? Are they just good? How's this going to work for SME? I'm realizing asking about 6 questions here, by the way, which is fine. So how's this going to work for SMEs who don't have the budgets of a lot of the large corporates that we end up working with? David, I know you had some views on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all sorts of factors in there, and I think too often we trivialize the challenges of employers at the current time. It's often said, you know, it's just a bit too complicated for them. So many small businesses are clinging on by their teeth currently and have been for some time. There are other challenges for businesses in the immediate future, particularly small businesses, as Brexit approaches in the UK and so on. So I think we really need to grasp the fact things may be possible, but if you're a small business, you do, and you're the manager, you do everything. You run the books, you are the HR, you are the occupational health, you do everything. For me, is driven by corporates when 85% of employment sits in the small and medium-sized sector. How do we adopt a blended approach when you've maybe only got 4 or 5 people in your business, and actually your business isn't administrative or office based, it has physical products that small team is responsible for? And I think there's so many factors as we go ahead, and what does coming back to a blended approach mean? I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface of that.
I think one of the things really interesting is that nobody I've ever spoken to, some people want to be back in the office or the workplace because they miss their colleagues and they don't like being at home. Nobody has says 2 to 3 hours on a packed underground train or whatever train, wherever they are in the country, or in a traffic jam. And I think that one of the things that might have to change is that where employers choose. So if it's going to be in an expensive city centre where people can't afford to rent or buy, so they have to live a long way out and then they have to commute in, then I think a lot of people who've had the experience of not doing that for 9 months are going to be reluctant to do that, and might choose, if they've got that ability to choose, and that will be, goes back to that privilege, to choose to work for an employer that allows them either to work from home or has a workplace that is a nice green walk or cycle or inclusive electric e-cycle ride into the workplace, because I think a lot of it is about the commute.
Yeah, I'm also interested in that SME conversation you were having, David, to say that they're already balancing, they run the HR, the health and safety and all the other things, and there might be the chief exec. Does that mean they don't have to make adjustments? Does that mean it's not reasonable to request those things?
But does it mean that the balance of responsibility between you, because actually what is reasonable at a very small level, with the resources you have available to you, may be quite different to a Microsoft, a BBC, and so on. And, I was listening to some of the things that we were being told that Microsoft are going to do for their remote employees. And I thought, wow, that's amazing as quite a huge corporate. But that's not going to happen at the small business, the small sector. And I think this is the challenge. It's not that it's right or wrong. It's not binary, to use a popular term, but actually it's along a continuum. And where do those responsibilities, the context, the environment, the business is part of that context in which responsibility.
Sorry, Beth, I was just, you go in.
I apologise as well, Beth.
After you, Bella.
I was just going to say, absolutely right, that reasonable depends on the circumstances and the individual case, but it is the case that small, and reasonable does mean, I mean, some of those things, those HR, admin, payroll things can be done remotely or in a blended way for a small employer as much as for a large employer. So as long as assumptions aren't made in the same way as they were made about disabled people, that because you're a small business, you can't make this adjustment, that's not true either. But there's always a balance of rights and responsibilities between the employer and the employee, and that's sort of within the law as well.
Yeah, Beth?
I was going to say, I think as the environment's changing, it's really important for us to take stock of why we're asking people to come into the office and to be really clear of the purpose of that, especially, with the commute and everything for many people. And kind of talked about that quite clearly. So collaboration, coaching and community. So, we've talked about examples where actually you're kicking off a new project and that means you have to have it in the office, or if you've got a difficult conversation or perhaps a performance review, or just enabling that sense of community to get to know each other. I think it's really key to stay clear about that, and that when people are going in, they are really clear, if it's one of those things or something else. And of course, I recognise that it does vary by organisation, and Sainsburys is a very big organisation. The other thing I would say from a disability perspective is through the pandemic, I mean, even I personally have been thinking, I can put up with this for now, this is short term. But as we think about the future, actually the things that you've put up with as a disabled person actually be untenable for a longer term working from home or flexible working model, and that's where I think thinking about reasonable adjustments and asking for what you need is really key. For every business, it's in our interest to, and it's our responsibility to give our people the tools for their job, and then they get more out of it, we get more out of them. It's an optimal solution, and that's where I think government schemes like Access to Work, which helps pay for reasonable adjustments for small and large organisations, is absolutely key.
Yeah, thank you for that, Beth. And we've had a question in from Michael from Microsoft, who was on the last panel, saying, should we ever go back to a more balanced hybrid model? What would need to be in place to ensure that being present, so actually being physically in the office, for example, with promotion? So we don't want people to be overlooked just because it's out of sight, out of mind, and the impact that could have on people with disabilities. And I think maybe this is something that we need to make sure line managers are just key, or middle managers. I know you said you're a manager, so it's how you keep in touch with these things and making sure that people stay on that radar and are aware. Did you have any thoughts around that?
I think it's a great question. I think communication is absolutely key and continues to be ever more key as we're remote. And I think it does come down to the line manager having a really good two-way ongoing conversation with their employees. One example that was brought up in a great conference I was at the other week was that sometimes you'll have some people in your team who don't always speak up in meetings, so they're a little bit more introvert. So And actually, that's where the line manager has that really key role of potentially kind of saying, oh, you know, Joe, do you have anything to add to that? And that's what inclusive leadership looks like, and why it's becoming more kind of remote world, helping kind of support those people to get to the table and be visible.
Thanks for that. And we're running out of time. I knew this would happen. We've had a question through from Jane about when we move back to a hybrid model of the sort of work, some working from home, some not in the office, what sort of inclusive practices can we put in place with online meetings to ensure that it's as accessible for those in the room as those joining remotely? Has anyone heard any good examples of what people have done around this that maybe we might want to adopt as some best practice? Anyone want to Yeah, sure.
I think it is a great question, and I'm not entirely sure I've got the right answer. I mean, this is one of those things that we wanted before everybody was sent home. We were always talking about the importance of including those remote workers, those flexible workers, so that it's not about physical presence around a meeting room. How do we use technology to bring people into that space? The great thing about so everybody has an experience of what it's like not to be physically present in the office or in a meeting that's going on. You know, we've seen within the Cardiff building that I mentioned that there are now kind of TV screens in there that hook up to Zoom or whichever video conference facility you have. So it's a lot easier for people to connect remotely and physically. And it's about getting it into people's minds, I think, when you're creating a meeting. How do you bring everybody in? And I think we will be a lot more aware that some people will be remote from that physical space. And it will be great if we can think about the accessibility of meetings, you know, so that we can provide kind of everybody access, and we can understand what's going on and communicate with that, with whatever meeting they're in.
I think there's actually been an interesting flip, because before loads of people were in the physical room, and if you were remote, you were feeling a bit excluded, and they were having a side chat included. I think that when it goes back to being some people in a room, one of the things that we might have to watch is the chat function, because a load of people who are remote are often chatting and telling jokes and going off on a tangent in the chat, which is actually quite difficult to keep up, as well as listen to and watch this, you know, screen sharing presentation at the same time. But the people in the room won't have access to that chat function. So there might be an interesting flip there. And I think there might be something to do around team meeting etiquette to say, don't chat separately on your phone or in the chat function. And I think there's going to be some interesting issues come out of that for accessibility as well when there's the hybrid.
I quite like that. You and I would be the one sat in the corner on the TV screen, sort of second thought, forgotten about slightly. And I quite like the idea that the table's being turned, but maybe that's just my personality type, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll come to you next, Beth. One other thing I was going to say that I'd heard people would do in the office and some at home in this gap in between was colleagues who were in the office were taking their laptops into the meeting room and doing that on a webcam. So everyone was on a Teams meeting, some happened to be in the same physical space, but everyone was then connecting over their webcams. And actually, I think that's quite a good solution, because it's quite inclusive for everyone. And how often have we said that it's actually really nice that we're all dialing in? Okay, we don't always all have the cameras on or whatever, but we've all got access to the same quality of information. And so that's really important as well. Beth, did you want to come in on that?
That was exactly the point I was about to make. So snap. Because I'm hard of hearing as well, I think that's what laptop, even if you are in the office. A lot of businesses are actually multi-locational already, and so I've been thinking about these things. So how do we get all our team in a room when actually they work in 3 different office spaces? How do we get them feeling included? And whilst Sean talked about the video conferencing and so on, but a lot of rooms aren't necessarily set up with video conferencing in mind. So you know, they're quite echoey, and the sound quality coming out of the speaker in the middle of the table is not very good for people who are, you know, in the room or dialing in, and so it's hard. And I think that's where the laptops are really key to that, and also obviously being conscious of the specific needs of people in the room. So if people do have disabilities, to be aware of you know, how we can make it easier for them.
Thanks for that, Beth. I'm going to have to round us up because I want to give 20 seconds to answer it, because I want to make sure we finish on time. So what one thing do you want employers to consider when we move to this blended model, which we think is probably quite likely? It's not, you know, at home or in the office. We move back to that. Bella, basically, because you're at the top of my Zoom chat here, Teams chat, I'm going to come to you first on that, if that's okay.
I think it's location, where the businesses are going to be in the future. So not clustering everything together in expensive city centres and accepting that people don't want to commute for long periods of time. So have spaces where people can meet in hubs, even if they are living remotely from each other.
Accessible ones, of course.
Accessible ones, of course.
Lovely. Beth, can I come to you next, please?
I alluded to it a minute ago, so I think setting up the technology for success, so you know, meeting rooms that have the correct for people dialing in from different places.
Yeah, I think AV teams could do really well out of this, couldn't they? I think I'm seeing that. Sean, can I come to you next, please?
I would like people to not forget the so that we remember when we go back to the office that people will want to work remotely, and you know, having a binary choice of in one place or the other isn't the best option for anyone, and it's about flexibility. So remember the flexibility.
Thank you, Sean. And David, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, I'll just build upon what Sean said, really, but I'd use the word fluidity. That for businesses to be resilient to the pressures that are happening, the turmoil, you need to be able to be fluid. You need to have options, and you need to have the competency to move fluidly from one scenario to another. Regardless of the size of your business, you don't know whether your context is going to stay the same in the future. Doing all the things we've talked about, which includes being an inclusive employer.
Thank you, everyone. I think there's a big lesson here that all your employees are individuals, and you need to listen to their individual needs and requirements to get the best out of them. So don't apply one size fits all, because it just doesn't work. On that note, I'm going to round us up. I think we're at the end of our time. We had more questions, but we didn't have a chance to get to them, I'm afraid. But I think TechShare Pro are doing a kind of frequently asked questions, so I'm sure they'll get covered up. Thanks for getting involved and engaged. Just leaves me to thank my panel. Thanks to Bella, Beth, Sean and David for joining me today. And thanks for AbilityNet and TechShare Pro for inviting us to be a part of this. And thank you everyone for joining us. You take care. Thank you.